Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Rcardo Arista, and I'm going to be going over Chapter 3 and 11 from Phonics to Fluency. So let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 3. So, Chapter 3 is broken up into three sections: initial assessment, measuring continuous progress, and making initial diagnosis, and diagnostic assessment. So, an initial assessment it breaks it up into six six categories. You have your phonemic awareness. Does the reader or learner know the sounds of English? Letter name recognition. Does the reader know all of the letters of the alphabet? Both can they recognize both the capital letters and the lowercase letters properly? And then letter sound knowledge. So does the reader know all of the sounds that the letters can make? So do they know all of the basic sounds of the consonant and vowels, and do they also know like the long vowels and the rules for that, and also digraphs and word meaning? Pretty simple. Do they know what the word means that they read? Um, Basic print concepts. So basic print concepts in a book. Um, so we have here, um, do they know what a title is? How does a title work? Which words are capitalized versus lowercase? Um, Indentations in a book. Do they know that that means a paragraph? Do they know what a paragraph is? Um, your your commas, your periods, your exclamation marks, and all of those things. So do they know uh, uh, how those function in writing and what they mean? So book awareness. Does the reader know that we open the book from right to left? And also, do they know that we read from from left to right and then down, back, left to right? Um, do they know how to properly treat a book? Are they like if you're going to hand them a book, are they going to abuse it, or are they going to treat it with respect? So those are your initial assessments. And then we have measuring continuous progress and making initial diagnosis. So in order to make your initial diagnosis, you need to find out if the child has word recognition, finding out what the percentage of words the child can read correctly. So that's as simple as if there are 100 words in a page and the child was able to read 98, well, then they have a 98% proficiency. Uh, 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 or 98% uh, word recognition. And if a child has a above, let's say like an 80%, then they're doing pretty well. So when it comes to fluency, you have automaticity and you have uh, prosody. Automaticity is can the reader recognize the word without much effort? Can they look at the word and oh, okay, that means cat or whatever it may be. While the other express is their reading expressiveness. Are they reading in the correct tone? When they're reading, are they reading like a robot or are they reading naturally like speech? Are they um conveying the what they're reading in the right way? Both either whether it be their internal monologue of what they're reading or what they're actually physically saying. And then, of course, comprehension. Does the child comprehend what they had just read? And so that one uh, can be done simply by just taking the text away and be like, okay, well, what did you just read? Um, and that can go on a sliding scale of 1 to 6. 1 being like they had no idea what they just read. They maybe got a name, and that's about it. Uh, and then 6 being they were able to give a detailed recall of what they had just read. So these two here, they're pretty objective. They're so you have to be aware of that. And while these here are more subjective. Wait, am I using this correctly? I don't know. diagnostic assessment. So this is more of the long term. So again, it's the same as the initial um, finding out what the fluency and everything is. So continuously looking at word recognition. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Um, how is it improving over time, or is it staying the same? Um, so phonograms, word families, so rhymes. This is a great, often thought as a great way to teach uh, phonics. So we can look here. We have like you can create in assessment. You can create a grid with different rhymes. So like say, pay, bug, rug, so on and so forth, and go down the grid, and you can have a student read down the column of rhymes. And if the child misreads one, well, then you can then go in and look, say, well, what's going on here? Like, you know, if the child says here, for instance, it's bug, and then he says this also is bug, well, then maybe there's a problem with them not having a recognition of the D or what sound the D can make. And next we have reading fluency. Again, it is like the whole the whole thing. Uh, does the child have an appropriate speed when they're reading, appropriate tone, and reading rate? So like this nice little formula here, words of the passage, and then seconds to read or time spent reading on the passage, and that can give you the reading rate. That was it for chapter 3. And now let's go into chapter 11. So, what's a word bank? The very first concept. And the next thing is how to use a word bank. So, what is a word bank? A word bank is a collection of words that a child knows. They can be from anywhere. It can be from books, movie, um, just general life. It's just a compilation of words that a student knows. And the word banks can be on index cards. Well, this is not index cards, but they can be on index cards. They can be digital. It can be in a list. Pretty much any compilation of words. Index cards are great because they're individual. They can easily flip through them. And if they're on index cards, they're pretty sturdy, so they can take a beating. Which I know my elementary school students put their things through the ringer. So using word banks. Using word banks, they broke it up into 5 different categories. You have reading individual, recording individual readings and vocabulary as reference for writing and spelling, as examples for groups, language study and instruction, providing reinforcement through repeated exposure, and word banks for stories and content study. Let's go ahead and look at the first one. So, recording individual reading vocabulary. It's easy for so you can go through and a child can just compile a list of words that they've learned through their readings and through their vocabulary, and they can just keep adding and adding and adding, and it's really great for the teacher to go in and find out, okay, how is your vocabulary? What words have you learned? It's a great way to take a bit of a sample of how things are going. Um, Word banks can be personalized. So let's say for this word cereal, if we're trying to learn vocab and it's English language learner, I can draw a little picture of a cereal. So if they kind of don't remember what the word cereal means, they can just flip it over and they can see a picture of a cereal. For most of these, most of the 5 uh, prong things or points of how to use uh, word bank, they suggest that a child know the word meaning and spelling for it to be effective and used as a word bank. So they can also be used to make games, which is nice. You can use them to make different party games for them to take home and use with their younger, like their brothers and sisters and their family, and make it a more fun activity, not just a dusty, crusty uh, box of index cards that they kind of like run through, cycle through for root memorization, something they can actually interact with. So, as a reference for writing and spelling. So, because these are words that they are expected or they should know, because they were the ones who created this compilation, this list, um, they should know these words, and so if they are having trouble like spelling for an assignment or something, they can always refer back to their word bank and reference like, is this how you spell cereal? Is this how you spell circle? Just kind of like a double check. There should be no excuse for them to like turn something in a final draft and they misspelled circle when it was circles in their word bank. Oh. So they can also be used to help build vocabulary when it comes to synonyms. So let's say for the word hungry. I think most kids know what the word hungry means, but they may not know what famished, starving, peckish, any number of words that could also mean hungry. But they may come across them in a book. They may come across them in the lesson, like peckish might come up somewhere. Um, if that's the case, you as a teacher or could tell them, oh, well, peckish means hungry. And then they can refer back to their word bank and they can even add it here. So not only will the word bank function as the dictionary, it also now is functioning as a thesaurus. So they're able to use it to enrich their writing as well. Like say they're writing about and want to use the word hungry, well, maybe they can now choose from a variety of words uh, that also mean hungry. Examples for group learning, study, and interaction. So words can be used uh, to do group projects and show difference in how words are pronounced versus how they're spelled. Words can be broken up to many different categories. These categories can either be open or closed. So open would be just having the students kind of like experiment and seeing what categories that they can make. So whether like are we looking at all the emotion words, or are we looking at all the color words, or how about all the verbs? Let's pull out all the like they can mishmatch and categorize and play with the words as they see fit, so that way they can kind of get a feel for them. Or we can do close where it's like a teacher centered thing where it's like, okay, let's look at a certain type of spelling, and I'll go into it a little bit more detail because that's what I did my one of my strategies on. So students can make their own categories and have fun with it. Providing reinforcement through repeated exposure. So they're constantly using them, so they should definitely know these guys. They can also, like I said before, use them to play games. For exposure, and the old tried and true method, super boring, where you just go through and use them as flashcards, but they can be far more than just simply flashcards. Uh, they can also use these, like I said before, her enrichment of writing with the use of a thesaurus or a dictionary or any of these uh, concepts to help enrich their writing. So word banks for stories and content study. So for most part, the students are expected to know what these words are and what they mean, and generally how to spell them. Uh, but a teacher can also make temporary word banks. So let's say if you're going over a story, reading a story out, either you out loud or one of the classes reading out loud. Once you finish reading the story, you can have the students go in, you know, have them grab their highlighters and go into a book and have them, okay, let's highlight all the words that we don't know, or let's highlight 12 to 24. I think that's the number they're given in the book. 12 to 24 uh, words. that are unknown, and we can write them into word banks, temporary word banks. And in those temporary word banks, the student is then expected to find out the meaning of the word and then incorporate it into their writing throughout the unit. So that way, by the end of the unit, they should know how to use that word. And uh, so with that, also with exposure and constantly incorporating it into the unit, they should hopefully learn those words relatively quickly. And that's it for chapter 11 and 3. Now let me go ahead and show you my 3 strategies. So the first strategy that I'm going over is the 3-minute reading assessment. So in order to do the 3-minute reading assessment, you have to have a sample reading passage. It's really helpful if you have one of these that have like the total number count and also the numbers on the side here. And also clearly labeled for what grade is also pretty helpful too. So you also have a set of rubrics. I chose to focus in on the comprehension rubric. So this is the comprehension rubric that is in our book. This is not the book. This is, yeah, not the book. So this is the one that's in From Phonics to Fluency in chapter 3. Yeah, in chapter 3 you'll find this. So go ahead and once a child reads this sample or this sample lesson, or not lesson, I'm sorry, sample text, then you can go ahead and ask them questions of like comprehension. So what did you just read? And then score them based upon how well they were able to comprehend or recall what they had just read. And so then that can go into one of these handy little grids here, or student progress chart. I'm sorry. And you can do it monthly or however often that you see fit to keep an eye on a child's progress. And so you go grade level, percentage of words read correctly, reading rate, prosody, and then comprehension of text. And you can go ahead and go through and see how things are. That's it for the 3-minute reading assessment. Pretty easy and pretty helpful if I do say so. And the next one is closed word sorting. So this came from chapter 11, closed word sorting. And in order to do this, you need to create a PowerPoint or some sort of presentation, whether or like a giant index cards or the old school like paper cardboard presentation, whatever floats your boat. And let's say you have students that are struggling decoding a certain sound, or let's say for instance you have C, hard C, and they have k and can, and then you have a soft C, which sounds like an S, or essentially sounds as an S. So city, and you're or not all, but most of your kids are saying kitty, and instead of saying cereal, they're saying Curial and Kirkle, and all of those wonderful, wonderful mispronunciations. As cute as they are, not correct. So you can go ahead and create a presentation with some words that you know that are in their word banks. Let's say, for instance, we have the word cat and we have the word can, and so on and so forth. So you have the presentation, and so you present to the class, all right, class, so what's this? And hopefully they all know, oh, it's a can. Okay, great. So what's this? Cat. Great. So then you go ahead and go on to the next slide. So what's this? Cell phone. What's this? Cereal. And then you can go ahead and go back to the previous slide and then ask them, okay, so this is a can. Let's look in our word banks and see if we can find the word can. Let's find the word can. And so they find the wonderful word can and they lay it down. It's like, all right, so like this is cat. Let's find the word cat. Finding the word cat. Do the same thing for the next slide. We got cereal and we have our cell phone. And so you can go ahead and lay it out and then ask the kids, like, so what are we noticing here? You can create a grid on the board, hard C, create a grid on the board for the two different sounds. So what are we noticing here? Cat, can, k, put it over here with the hard C sound, and then cereal, cell phone, city, circle. What are we noticing? It's a soft C. Putting in the soft C. So what do we notice? And then, of course, asking the students, so what do we notice about the soft C? What do we notice about cereal and circle? They both have a C or an E. Right. So let's go ahead and look through all of our word bank and see if we can find all of the CI and CE words and all of the K sound words. And, separate them and then move on from there. So that was an example of close sorting. So the last strategy is something that I use in my classroom, and it also involves word banks, but a little bit differently. So I like to use word banks for cognates. So I work with EFL students, or EFL, ELL, emergent bilinguals. And they don't get a whole lot of English exposure outside of my classroom. I only see them for maybe about 2 or 3 hours a week, each class or each grade level. So I want to do my best to maximize my time in when it comes to vocabulary and basically everything. Uh, So I have them go through, and one of the first things we do in phonics, the phonics courses, the intro level courses, is to create a cognate word bank. So I usually start out. Usually they're really young. They don't even realize that the word coffee isn't a Korean word, not even an English word, but that it's a loan word, or the word bus isn't a Korean word. So I go through and be like, okay, so let's look at this. So we have busu. What's that? It's bus. And then we go ahead and we go through like, how about taxi? What could taxi be in Korean? Surprise, surprise, it's taxi. How about radio? Radio. And then of course, go through and give them as many examples that I can think of that I know that they know. And then I ask them for examples that they may know. You'd be surprised. Like sometimes they come up with egg, and there's a lot of words that are colloquially used, that are English, but have been kind of incorporated into like kind of like a Konglish. And so we go ahead and we compile a cognate word bank that they can have for reference. They walk in thinking that they don't know any English words. Well, surprise, surprise, they actually knew quite a few English words. And then on top of that, I use these cognates word banks, I use their word banks to create their sight words for phonics. So if when we're learning the alphabet, of course, so we have key. We know the word key. It's key. K, key. C, coffee, coffee. So it's kind of like it's a little less intimidating for them. It's not as overwhelming. They're not like bombarded with a brand new word, and they're also starting to associate it with English versus Korean. Yeah, that's it. Those are my 3 strategies and the overview of chapter 11 and 3. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you. Goodbye.